Welcome to Fame Under Fire with me, Anoushka Mutanda-Dougherty. Now, just a warning, we have a pretty heavy episode with graphic descriptions of sexual violence and some strong language from the outset. We're going to be going through the new federal indictment of retired Wall Street investor Howard Rubin and his ex-assistant Jennifer Powers. The feds allege that Rubin ran a sex trafficking ring for over 10 years where, with the help of Powers, he would recruit and electrocute women in a room in a Manhattan flat he referred to as the dungeon. They have both pled not guilty to the charges. Joining me is our resident trial attorney, Shaun Kent. Hi, Shaun.
Hey, Anoushka, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Like I said at the beginning of this program, this is a pretty heavy one. We've given several warnings to the listeners. You've read through the indictment and the bail letter. I just want to point out where I found this. I first saw this on TikTok and it was going viral with people drawing parallels between these charges and Jeffrey Epstein. Obviously, Howard Rubin is a New York financier, so I can see why people are making the link. But actually, if we look at the alleged crimes, there are no children involved in this whatsoever. There's no sex trafficking of minors involved in this whatsoever.
None whatsoever.
And the reason I want to point that out is similarly to when we had with Diddy, is because it changes how it's prosecuted, right? Because you don't have to prove coercion with minors. You have to prove coercions with adults.
You have become like the legal expert in this arena now. You're exactly right. When you're dealing with adults, the defense is almost always going to be there was a lack of coercion. They were consenting adults. Almost always.
So I can see this is doing the rounds on social media. People are a bit confused about what the alleged crimes are and how this is going to be prosecuted in a court of law if it, of course, gets there. There are conspiracy theories. We've heard this before. We heard this all the way through Diddy. But this is a federal indictment. And so we know what the US government are actually alleging. 10 counts plus a bail letter that gives us even more detail. But Shaun, I haven't actually said the word federal indictment in a long time. Can you just remind everybody what that actually is?
A federal indictment or any indictment is just a charging document. It's a piece of paper that puts the defendant on notice on the charges that the federal government is trying to get against them. Some people make general indictments, some people make specific indictments, but the entire purpose of an indictment is you go in front of a grand jury who are a group of individuals in the jurisdiction where the crime is alleged to occurred. They take information, they put it in front of this group of individuals, and they say, is it likely? Is there a chance? Is there a possibility that the person on the other side of the indictment could have done this stuff? And almost always the grand jury says, probably. And if they say, probably, the case is indicted. And that's what's happened here. Now that means he must stand forth against the United States of America, charged with the crimes that he's accused of.
And remind me, the grand jury isn't a jury where we pick from a selection of the public. This is an investigative body.
Yes and no. It is picked from the public, but it still is an investigative body. So they are not professional grand jurors, Anoushka. What it is, it's John Q. Public. Like if you were in the United States, you could be picked for the grand jury, but that grand jury in a federal system sits there for a long period of time, for a significant period of time, and then they still investigate what's going on cases.
Okay, so we're really going to get into the weeds of this. Like I said, part of this is dispelling conspiracy theories, but it's also extremely interesting and feels kind of similar to the Diddy trial in that these are intimate spaces where these alleged crimes are taking place, inside of a bedroom in a Manhattan flat or inside of a hotel room between two adults. The federal indictment alleges that from 2009 to 2019, the defendants Howard Rubin and Powers, together with others, operated a network whereby they recruited women, including Jane Doe's 1 through 10, individuals whose identities are known to the grand jury. Shaun, can you just remind us, what is a Jane Doe?
Jane Doe is just a pseudonym. It's an anonymous name that they put on when they don't want to release the name of the actual person involved. They want to protect the victim's anonymity.
These women, it alleges, were recruited to engage in commercial sex acts with Rubin in exchange for money. Those acts involved BDSM. Now, that's an abbreviation for bondage, discipline, domination, submission, sadism, and masochism. During many of these encounters, it alleges Rubin brutalized women's bodies, causing them to fear for their safety and or resulting in significant pain or injuries, which at times required women to seek medical attention. It goes on to say Rubin and Powers spent at least $1 million of Rubin's money operating and maintaining the trafficking network herein. So we have a charge of sex trafficking. We have a charge of transportation for prostitution under the Mann Act. If you are propositioned as somebody to do a commercial sex act and you say, yes, if you pay me this money, I'll do that, I'm willing to go here and participate in this. If you don't have to be forced to be sex trafficked. It doesn't have to be against your will for you to be a victim of sex trafficking.
That is such a nebulous question because remember, one of the lines inside of the sex trafficking allegations is force and or coercion. And
Mm.
so what they'll end up saying is you can force or coerce somebody and they not even realize they're being forced and or coerced. And that's what we learned from the Diddy trial is they're saying you might have think you were consensual, but it wasn't consensual because you were forced and or coerced. And you remember Diddy's case, they offered an expert who specifically said a lot of these people don't even realize that they're under the trauma of coercion or so forth. So yes, you can fit both categories, even if you don't think that you are being coerced.
So it goes on to say between 2009 and 2011, it is alleged the commercial sex acts primarily occurred at luxury hotels in Manhattan. Prosecutors say in 2011, Howard Rubin and Jennifer Powers transformed one of the bedrooms in the penthouse, so they have a penthouse, into a sex dungeon that was painted red and soundproofed, had a lock on the door, and was furnished with BDSM equipment to which women could be strapped and restrained and contained devices to shock or electrocute them, among other items. The pattern that's laid out is these women were approached by Powers and or Rubin on social media, modeling pages, or high-end prostitution networks. Many of them were former Playboy models. They were then flown to wherever Rubin was, at which point they signed an NDA that they did not get a chance to check before engaging in BDSM and sex acts. The indictment says that Rubin materially misrepresented to the women the extent, manner, and or degree to which Rubin would engage in physical and sexual violence. Again, Rubin and Powers have pled not guilty to this. But the fact that these women were approached on different sites, some of them on high-end prostitution network sites by Powers or Rubin, doesn't that directly work against the idea that they're victims?
Absolutely. Like that is going to be the defense. They signed up for aggressive sex, if you will. They signed up for some type of beating, but they didn't know it was going to go that far. That's their allegation. That's a scary allegation as you realize to make to say, wait a minute, you women knew that you were going to go. You knew it was going to be aggressive. You knew you were going to get paid for it. You knew they were going to get beatings. It just went further than you thought it will. That's going to cut towards the government. The cross-examination of them is going to be withering. You knew that this was going to be aggressive, nasty sex to the point that you needed a safe word. So you knew this was going to be aggressive, and now you chose to sue. And as a result of suing, then the federal government brought these criminal charges.
So, well, in this case, could you end up bringing an expert in BDSM to say, this is what it is, these are the parameters, this is what typically happens, and this is beyond?
Here's the weird part. You're probably going to have conflicting BDSM experts. Somebody's going to say this should be expected, and somebody says this shouldn't be. I could see there being conflicting experts, and that's usually what happens. One expert can say one thing and one can say another, because here's the real situation. Who really is an expert on BDSM? Like, you know what I mean? Who knows what somebody else's kink or actual fetish is? Who knows what these people signed on? Who knows what they agreed to? That's going to be his defense.
Yeah, so Howard Rubin was also sued in the civil courts in 2017. The action lasted until 2022, and a jury found Rubin liable for sex trafficking and assault, awarding $3.85 million to several women. Powers was cleared of any wrongdoing. Rubin is now appealing the verdict. If a jury sits for a federal trial, will they be aware of that civil trial, the ruling, and what that jury came to? And if so, is that not biasing the jury pool?
There could be an argument that he stood trial, but what they 100% will be aware of is his own statements. Those statements of his can be used. Because remember, he testified and he gave a deposition. And so he has explained a lot of this information. So all of that is fair game. What makes this case to me so rare is usually the criminal case comes first, and then we have a civil case. If the government in the Diddy case, think about it, would have waited for his civil cases to go through and Diddy having to sit for a deposition and then using his own words against him, how different would the trial against Diddy would have been? So in this unique situation, they have all of his words against him, which is wild when you think about it for a criminal prosecution.
I just want to get into a phrase that's used. Prosecutors say these women are signing NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. They are being booked in some sense or propositioned or asked on a date, but aware that BDSM is going to take place. It says he materially misrepresented the extent to which they could sustain injuries from that or that sexual violence was going to be involved. What is material misrepresentation, and is there a specific bar you have to meet for that?
No, it's just a fancy lawyer word to say that you basically tricked us. A material representation is, I promise you when you come to my house, you will leave full. I will feed you. And you come to my house and I give you 7 chickpeas. Well, you materially misrepresented. You told me you were going to feed me, but you didn't feed me a lot of food. And so in this situation, you told me I was going to get hurt, but you didn't tell me I was going to get hurt. And his response is going to be like, I told you you're going to get hurt. I didn't get into specifics.
But if we look at the NDA, which they've signed, and I'm sure that's going to be a key part of what the prosecution say when they look at these documents, but these women are saying they signed it without their own legal counsel reading it or even having a chance to properly look over it themselves. Does that weaken the NDA, or is the idea there, well, you shouldn't have signed it?
Well, the idea is going to be from the defense, you shouldn't have signed it, but it's really going to come through, I think, a simple concept. Did you take the money? And so from a defense lawyer standpoint, they're going to make it very contractual. Did he tell you were going to get hurt? Yes. Did you sign an agreement? Yes. Did he fulfill his end of the agreement? Yes. Did he pay you? Yes. Were you hurt? Yes. But I didn't think it was going to go that far. That's our contract. You may not like it now, and as a result, you sued for more money, but there was an agreement and you agreed to it. I know that sounds sick and abhorrent, but that, I think, is going to be the defense.
The indictment goes on to allege that Rubin would give the women a safe word, which, if you look into BDSM, is kind of a common practice. So if this goes too far, say this word and then we'll stop. But that he often disregarded it, or that the women couldn't use it because they were bound or gagged. I know, okay, if they consented to being bound or gagged, could he use that as a defense and say, well, they were bound and gagged, so I couldn't hear them?
Well, he's going to use that for a defense, and he's going to, unless these things are recorded, guess what? It's my word versus your word. You never said the safe word. I didn't hear you say it. I didn't hear it. I don't know what you're talking about. You signed on for this. When things aren't being recorded and it's just your words, that's going to be his defense, I believe. He's like, that never happened.
Now, we mentioned that this has made its way through the civil courts in 2017, settled in 2022. We're going to look at that in more detail in a future episode, but the allegations are very similar in the civil suit to what's in the indictment. Now, the lawyer who represents those claimants told me that his firm had been cooperating with the US Attorney's Office during the last few years. Now, I've only done one other federal case, but Diddy happened really fast, from raids to indictment to court to trial and verdict. It was like 2 years wrapped. Is this more normal, that it's over a period of several years, or was Diddy more the pace that things usually move at?
Diddy's case moved at lightning pace. Diddy's case is one of the faster cases we've seen. And, we go back to the very early talkings with me and you, Anoushka. What we basically said is, as a defense attorney, you would rather go against an unprepared federal government than a prepared federal government. They know everything that they need to know. They've interviewed everybody, talked to everybody, gotten all the witnesses, and they're ready for a prosecution.
How does that make it a fair fight then, if his defense are like, you've been working on this for years and we only have months? Do they then petition for it to go longer and longer?
It is not a fair fight because they've been working on it so long. And usually when the federal government comes and gets you, when we have clients and they say, look, I get a target letter from the federal authorities, and I'm like, man, they've been looking at you for a long time is what that means. And they built the case. It's not a fair fight. And that is one of the reasons everyone always says the federal government has such a high conviction rate, because they've been working on it forever. And no, it's not fair. But that's our system.
Yeah, I don't want to keep going back to Diddy as well, but there's such a reflection in this, because it's taking place in similar venues. That's the allegation, right? It's taking place inside of bedrooms between, the defense will say, two consenting adults, and then the prosecution is saying a victim and the perpetrator. As far as the indictment goes, though, it outlines the alleged sex trafficking operation and venue, but there's not that much in the way of actual detail. That seems to come in a letter from the US Attorney's Office asking that Rubin doesn't get bail. So we get some more detail in this letter about Jennifer Powers' involvement with setting up the, quote, dungeon. That's what the prosecution are alleging. In an email on the 30th of July 2012, this is from Powers to Rubin. It says, quote, I've put chains on the 4 points of your cross and 4 points of the dungeon bed. On the end of each chain is a cuff. I've done this because it will be very, all caps, easy to just throw someone on the cross or on the bed and just strap them into the pre-made chains and cuffs. So in terms of establishing her as a co-defendant, is that what that's there for?
That's what it's there, is just to show that she is a co-conspirator, that she is part of it, and make sure they establish that she is a part and parcel of the sex trafficking. And remember, a co-conspirator does not have to do the exact same things that you have done, but once they have been named a conspirator, they are responsible for everything you've done. And it's It's almost like rinse and repeat. It's so weird if you look at it.
And you talk about the relationship there. Obviously, Powers is listed as a co-defendant. But what they talk about is the recruitment process, saying that Powers was engaged in recruiting these women, saying, oh, you need to meet Howard Rubin and this is what's going to happen. But then they also go some way in describing her participation in what happened afterwards, sort of cleaning up afterwards. And they include this text from Howard to Powers. It says, "It got very rough, Jen. We need to be very, 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 in all caps, nice. Very important. Trust me, very important." And she responds saying, "Okay, I am being nice. I just hope you know what you're doing." Surely these are crucial pieces of information, if not for anything other than when you spoke about Diddy, you said they do stuff sometimes to catch our attention as the general public. So there are eyes on this case. Why not have this in the indictment so we're looking?
I personally think this indictment is smarter than the Diddy indictment, and here's why. As a defense lawyer, I love when a prosecution puts a very specific indictment, because later when they can't prove these small elements in front of the jury, then I can get in front of the jury and say, look, you went in front of a grand jury. You got an indictment against this human being. You said he did this, 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 and this. Ladies and gentlemen, have you heard any of this information? This is incorrect. This is a lie. The United States of America is lying to you today. As opposed to the United States saying, look, this is very general. We're generally saying this stuff happened. And then the letter that they put in front of the court is where they put all the specificity to it. It's actually kind of brilliant that now they can still get their information out and it's not in a form indictment order.
And in that letter, we also get a closer look at what the government are alleging was part of the BDSM activity. It says, and I give another warning here because this is quite graphic, it included electrocuting their genitals, probing their genitals with pool cues, and performing violent sexual acts on their bodies while they were unconscious. So that's some of the sexual crimes that they are alleging that Rubin did to these women. Once again, this is in the letter, but it's in the letter which is also a public document so anyone can read it. So why can't they say that the federal government's lying about what's in this letter?
Because that's not the formal charging document. They didn't put that letter in front of the grand jury. All they put in front of the grand jury was the indictment. That letter, for all intents and purposes, even though it's sensational, even though everybody's going to read it, the real point of it is, judge, don't give this person a bond. That's the only point, supposedly, of the letter. It's saying you don't need to give him a bond for two reasons. He's a danger to the community and he's a risk of flight. He's got so much money. He's got no ties to New York. He's got no family. He's been divorced. If you get him a bond, he's gone. That's the real point of the letter, but they managed to put all that other stuff in there so everybody could read it and know the case against him. That letter could have been done in a page and a half. And guess what? They really didn't even need the letter.
But if we go to some of what they've described as being the alleged crimes, electrocution of the genitals is something that jumps out, right? My question to you is, even if it was in the NDA, please sign this and then we can shock you, Even if they said yes to all of these things, is there a point where the law can just step in and say, even though you've consented, this is too far because this is damaging like you as a person and we're stepping in now and taking over? Or if, when you're an adult, if you consent to something, is that just it?
No. And I'm glad you said that. There's a couple of ways that we look at consent. One, I don't care who you are, a minor can't consent. Then there's vulnerable individuals. If they have a mental incapacity to the point that they cannot form the necessary mens rea, the necessary intent to agree to something, then we say we protect those people. So we try to protect vulnerable is the best category. And then we go to the next category, and that's what we were talking about here. What about these consenting adults? Is there a point in time in which the law stands in and tries to save people from themselves? Yes. And that's this type of situation. You could say, look, I did sign the agreement. I did agree to this. I did say this, but it went too far. And then you say the next. The only reason I agreed to it is I was in such a financial disparate situation. He had such power and control over me. I had to do this. We see this a lot in unequal situations. Let's say somebody is your boss and you can't live without him. And he says, look, I want you to agree to this, 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 and this, sign this agreement. And if you don't, you're losing your job. So yes, the law does stand in and protect adults if they are in vulnerable situations.
Well, in that bail letter, the government say that some of these women were addicts, were financially vulnerable, or were sexually abused in childhood. So I'm assuming those are some of the protected categories.
Check. You're hitting it. They're all protected categories. Are these vulnerable adults? And that's what the The trial is going, you've already sprayed out the trial. There will be an expert will testify. They were not going to be able to give consent based upon past trauma, based upon financial situations, based upon disparate impact, based upon drug use, based upon unequal situations. All that will come out, that even though we have their signature, it doesn't matter. They could have never consented to these situations. And his defense is going to be, how the hell would I know? Well,
there are some texts included in the bail letter where Howard describes Jane Doe number 10 as, quote, hating, submissive, but she will do anything, ... She hates it, but she's so submissive, we've got to make her cry. There are a few messages in there that seem to be an acknowledgement that somebody doesn't want to do this, but they're doing it for financial gain or because they're in a tough spot. So are we starting to see the prosecution's rebuttal to that then?
Absolutely. And this is why sex trafficking was created, because there was that loophole, that nuance based upon exactly what you're saying, that people were able to say they did consent, they did agree. And the person said, I did consent, I did agree, I did tell them I want it, but they knew the bad situation that I was in and they shouldn't have taken advantage of that. And so this is the whole reason why the sex trafficking statute was created, because there was that loophole that there were true victims out there who said, I was in a situation and nobody was looking out for me. I did stupid stuff, but I had no choice based upon my lot in life.
Now, Rubin and Powers have both pled not guilty. Powers was granted bail after posting an $850,000 bond, but Rubin was denied it. Now, he's a 70-year-old man. Does that surprise you that he was denied it?
No, it really doesn't. He's got a bunch of money and all of his money are offshores. And given his age, there's nothing to say he would not run and not come back. So, yeah, it makes sense why he was not given a bond, and he was treated similarly to most other people.
I mean, yeah, they talk about threat to a community as well. I just wondered if this played into it. There's an allegation that he tried to hire a hitman after he found out one of the Jane Does was raising a civil lawsuit against him. That kind of detail, does that play into denying him a bond?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought this up, because if you read in that paragraph in there, they quote United States of America versus Combs. And what they do in quoting United States of America versus Combs, they say, in this district, you have denied bond before for an individual who was possibly threatening potential victims on these cases. And that's what we talk about. You got to be careful with precedential value. So now they're able to say, because you denied bond on Combs, you need to deny bond on this guy.
They also point out that they believe him to have $74.4 million in a bank account on an island in the Cayman Islands. So it definitely has the means to run if he wanted to. Now, do you think this is actually going to go to trial?
I've been toying with that back and forth, but in this unique situation, I don't know what he has to lose. He's 70 years old. I don't know what deal the federal government would offer him, and that's what happens a lot of times, unless they offer him such a deal that comes with cooperation, as we've talked about, cooperation against other potential individuals. Maybe he says, you know what? I don't have anyone to lose. I will testify against anybody you want.
I was going to ask about other people because there are co-conspirators listed. We have Howard Rubin named, we have Jennifer Powers named, but co-conspirators left anonymous. Should I be expecting a superseding indictment where they start to gradually name these people?
I would think so, because like I said, you almost can always see another superseding indictment. And then you can actually see throughout the course of indictment, they mention other co-conspirators unnamed. These might be testifying individuals. Maybe he's going to cooperate against some of those, but I definitely see a superseding indictment coming. I don't know when, but one will be coming.
They've been working on this case for ages. I told you earlier that the lawyer who prosecuted the civil case says he's been cooperating with the attorney's office, the US attorney's office. Why not just name them all at once at the beginning? You've had time.
But don't forget, a lot of times what the federal government will do is just because they've worked on it, they haven't told everybody they're being charged, because let's say they go to one of his co-conspirators and say, hey, you want to cooperate against Mr. Rubin? And so probably what has happened is after the indictment has come out with him, they've now started to tell people, you're either going to be charged or you're going to be cooperating. Here's the information against you. You got about 3 weeks before we lay that other indictment down, the superseding. You want to help or not?
Well, look, Howard Rubin and Jennifer Powers have pled not guilty to the charges. We contacted their attorneys for a comment, but we have not heard back yet. Shaun, thanks for running us through that.
Thank you for having me. Much appreciated.
That was our resident trial attorney, Shaun Kent from South Carolina. And that's it for this episode of Fame Under Fire. Send me questions and story suggestions on social media. It's Anoushka_MD on Instagram and on TikTok. Make sure you subscribe to the BBC Sounds YouTube channel so you never miss an episode.